Have you ever noticed there's more to alcohol than just the drinking? That the drinking itself is only part of the experience. Sometimes the effect begins hours before that first sip. The decision has been made. The bottle is waiting. The workday is ending. The tension starts to lift. And, strangely enough, you begin to feel different before alcohol ever enters your bloodstream. That is not your imagination. That is neurochemistry. And understanding that fact may completely change the way you think about your relationship with alcohol, recovery, and, frankly, yourself. Because one of the greatest misconceptions about alcohol is the idea that its effects begin only after you drink it. They do not. The process starts earlier, much earlier. The brain of a person exposed to alcohol chronically, those that are vulnerable to alcoholism, or what I call chemically mediated disinhibition syndrome, begins reacting to the anticipation of alcohol itself, the expectation, the ritual, the planning, the possibility of relief. All of these can begin altering dopamine release and changing emotional state before the first drink is ever consumed. And once you understand this, many aspects of this disease suddenly begin to make sense. Now, let's discuss what's actually happening. Alcohol is not simply a beverage. It's a psychoactive drug with profound biochemical effects on the human nervous system. Shortly after ingestion, alcohol alters several major neurotransmitter systems in the brain. One of the primary systems involved is the GABA system. GABA is essentially the brain's braking system. It slows neuronal activity. When alcohol enhances GABA activity, people feel calmer, less anxious, less inhibited. The noise quiets down. Simultaneously, alcohol suppresses glutamate, which is one of the brain's major excitatory neurotransmitters. Glutamate is heavily involved in alertness, memory formation, learning, judgment, and thinking itself. Suppressing it is part of why intoxicated people become forgetful, impulsive, emotionally reactive, and sometimes incapable of good decision making. Then there's dopamine. Now, dopamine is often misunderstood. People talk about it as a pleasure chemical, and that's a gross oversimplification. Dopamine is heavily involved in motivation, anticipation, salience, and reinforcement. It essentially tells the brain, this matters, pay attention to this, remember this, and do it again. And alcohol can produce a substantial dopamine release in vulnerable individuals. But here's the fascinating part. Research strongly suggests that eventually even the anticipation of drinking itself can trigger dopamine release. Not the alcohol, just the expectation of alcohol. The Friday afternoon ritual, pulling into the liquor store parking lot, hearing the ice hit the glass, knowing that relief is coming. The brain begins responding before you take that drink. That is why many people describe feeling calmer simply knowing that they're going to drink later that evening. Their neurochemistry is already changing. Now, imagine what this means behaviorally. If your brain learns that alcohol produces the illusion of relief from stress, anxiety, insecurity, boredom, loneliness, or emotional discomfort, then alcohol stops being viewed as entertainment. It becomes medicine. Except it's defective medicine. Because although it temporarily alters emotional states, distorts emotional states, it progressively damages the systems responsible for emotional regulation in the first place. And this is where chronic alcohol exposure changes the game. The brain does not passively tolerate repeated intoxication. It adapts. This is called neuroadaptation. Over time, the brain attempts to compensate for alcohol's effects. Because alcohol chronically enhances inhibition through GABA, the brain reduces the sensitivity of GABA receptors. At the same time, because alcohol suppresses glutamate, the brain increases excitatory glutamate activity in compensation. This is why tolerance develops. The same amount of alcohol no longer produces the same effect. The brain is fighting back. And eventually, the person is no longer drinking to get high. They're drinking to feel relatively normal. Then comes the real problem. When alcohol is suddenly removed, the brain is left in a hyperexcitable state. The inhibitory systems are weakened. The excitatory systems are amplified. That is withdrawal. Anxiety, tremor, insomnia, sweating, irritability, and panic. In severe cases, seizures and delirium tremens. And here's something people often misunderstand. Withdrawal is not simply evidence that someone likes alcohol too much. Withdrawal is evidence that the brain itself is physically adapted to the chronic presence of that drug. Now, beyond this, chronic alcohol exposure appears to impair baseline dopamine function itself. Normal pleasures begin to feel muted. Food, relationships, accomplishment, exercise, quiet moments. Life becomes flatter, and alcohol increasingly stands out as the one thing capable of rapidly changing emotional state because it's the only thing left that can alter dopamine release. This is why alcoholism progressively narrows people psychologically. Their lives begin revolving around alcohol in ways they often do not even recognize. Obtaining it, planning around it, recovering from it, hiding it, anticipating it, and again, anticipation itself becomes reinforcing. Now, this has enormous implications for recovery because many people entering sobriety believe the problem is simply removing alcohol from the equation. It is not. That is only the beginning. The deeper challenge is that the brain has often spent years learning to associate alcohol with relief, reward, comfort, celebration, escape, confidence, emotional anesthesia, and sometimes even identity itself. And when alcohol is removed, individuals are frequently shocked by what remains. The restlessness, emotional discomfort, boredom, unease, the mental noise. This is one reason early sobriety feels so strange. The person is no longer chemically suppressing reality. But equally important, their brain's reward and stress systems are temporarily dysregulated. Now here's where I think many recovery discussions become incomplete. People often frame alcoholism as either a moral failure or entirely a brain biochemical issue. I think the reality is more complicated. Biochemistry clearly matters. The changes are measurable. The adaptations are real. But human beings are not robots solely driven by neurotransmitters. Beliefs matter. Identity matters. Environment matters. Trauma matters. Learned behavior matters. Meaning matters. And this is why simply detoxing people is usually insufficient. Because if alcohol was serving as the primary mechanism for emotional regulation, then removing alcohol without developing new mechanisms creates enormous vulnerability. You have removed an individual's solution without addressing the underlying problem. And this is why recovery often requires profound personal change, not superficial change. Actual change, learning how to tolerate emotion without chemical intervention, learning how to experience stress without sedation, learning how to sit with uncertainty, learning how to live in reality without demanding control. And frankly, many people never fully understand this. They'll spend years trying to figure out how to safely reintroduce alcohol into their lives, instead of asking the more important question, why did I need it so badly in the first place? That question changed my life, because once I understood that alcohol was not truly making my life better, that it was actually artificially manipulating my emotional state while progressively damaging my ability to regulate myself naturally, the entire illusion began collapsing. I stopped seeing alcohol as a reward, and I started seeing it for the biochemical trap that it is, a trap that slowly teaches the brain that relief comes from outside rather than from adaptation, growth, perspective, discipline, spirituality, relationships, or meaning. Now, None of this means recovery is unobtainable. Far from it. The remarkable thing about the human brain is its capacity for healing. Dopamine systems can improve. They can return to normal. Stress responses can normalize. Sleep improves. Clarity improves. Emotional stability improves. But it takes time. And importantly, it takes participation. Recovery is not merely abstinence. Abstinence is only where recovery begins. Recovery is the gradual rebuilding of a human being who no longer requires chemical distortion to tolerate existence. And once you understand what alcohol is actually doing to the brain, both acutely and chronically, many things suddenly make sense. Why anticipation itself becomes powerful. Why cravings can feel overwhelming. Why stopping can feel emotionally destabilizing. Why relapse occurs. And why attempts at moderation can become a black hole for certain individuals. And perhaps more importantly, why lasting recovery requires much more than simply putting down the bottle. If you have made a commitment to change your relationship with alcohol, I have created a 90-day sobriety survival kit to help you reach this important milestone. I've put links to more information about this in the description below. If these ideas resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and most importantly, comment below. I'm Dr. Donald Crowe, and I'll see you in the next one.